Well, good morning. Hope everyone had a good Christmas celebration. And like so many others, I've been fighting a cold and everything. I guess all of us have it in my house. So hopefully I'll get through today. If you would turn with me to the book of Matthew, chapter 2. Today, of course, will be the last of the Christmas themed messages. We started talking about the wise men and went back to the book of Daniel to see where they could have came from and why they would have even cared about a Jewish king being born. And so we studied that and saw how Daniel became the head of the wise men, in fact, saving the wise men, which definitely would have gave him an audience with them. They would have paid attention to what he had to say about his God, knowing that his God saved them when their gods could not. And so it makes perfect sense that the tie-in would be coming from this. The wise men would have been understanding the prophecies, studying the prophecies that Daniel would have taught to them, studying the prophecies from the Bible itself. And when the time was right for them to travel, because they indeed were going to worship the one that they knew to be the King of the Jews. And the fact that they were going to worship meant they also recognized this King of the Jews as being God. And so I'm sure all the wise men down through the ages did not continue to believe, or maybe all didn't believe to begin with. We never have that to happen, do we? Even in our churches, not everyone believes the same things. Not everyone even believes in God that attends church. Unfortunately, that's becoming more and more true in our society. In Matthew chapter 2, it starts off by saying, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem." Then when we read this, many times we read it as though they are arriving in Jerusalem at this point. When in fact, most likely they did not depart from where they were coming from until after the birth of Jesus Christ. When they saw the star appear, and we're saying, I'll prove that to you more as we go along through this. So once they realized that the prophecy was coming true, the prophecy from Numbers chapter 24, in fact, I'm going to skip back there real quick, the prophecy that they most likely were referring to, Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, "I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheath." Most theologians believe this is, in fact, the prophecy that they were looking at. When they saw the star, they made that connection with this prophecy. And then that prophecy, along with others that Daniel taught about the coming Messiah, the coming Christ. So once they saw the star appear, they would have started making their preparations to leave. More than likely, it would not have been a quick get-together, right? Throw a few things in a suitcase and hit the road. A couple of things that we learned last time about the wise men that we traditionally believe. One is that there were three of them, and the Bible never says there were three of them. It never says a number other than the wise men. So it could have been three. It was definitely more than one. Most likely it was more than three. Some believe that it was even in the hundreds that would have been coming. But we can't say with certainty, and definitely don't need to continue to say that there's three wise men when the Bible doesn't back that up. That's one of those doors that opens up for the non-believers to say, see, you don't even believe your own Bible. It doesn't say how many there come, but you're saying there are three. Tradition says there were three. Once upon a time, tradition said there was four. Then that changed to three. Years from now, it may be a different number. And so once they saw the star in the sky, they would have started making preparations. And they would have had to get permission from their king to travel, most likely. Now, that's another thing that we are told or believe from tradition that is absolutely not true, is that they were kings. We even have a popular Christmas song, right? We three kings coming from the Orient. None of that's true. They were not kings. They were wise men. They weren't just men who were wise. They were wise men. And we saw in the book of Daniel what that meant. They were men that were considered to be a special authority with the king. Their special place with the king. Men who studied science and mathematics and everything to do with education at that point, things that most others did not study. They studied the scriptures. They studied pretty much anything that there was to study. They were very intelligent men. They're also called in Daniel sorcerers and magicians. So they supposedly had powers to commune with the gods until Daniel set them straight about the one true God. And then hopefully the majority at least started believing in the one true God. I certainly believe that these men who are coming did so. So a couple things that we always say, they did not come from the Orient. Most likely they came from Persia, about 800, 900 miles away from Jerusalem. So again, would not have been a quick journey on camel, most likely is the way they traveled. They probably would have came with a small army, not just the men themselves. They would have had protection because they were carrying precious gifts, as we will see in a little bit. Everybody knows the story about what they were carrying. So these gifts were expensive gifts. There were things that people would have loved to take from them. The roads were dangerous to travel by yourself. So they would have had a small army, perhaps 100 men, 200, 300. We don't know for sure. The Bible doesn't confirm that, but looking back at history, we can see that they would not have traveled on their own for sure. They would have had protection. And so as they're traveling from the east, it says, then the wise men came from the east, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. And so they come into town, and we usually think right here that they're in front of Herod when they're stating this. I've kind of always thought that myself. For years, I thought, well, they're standing in front of Herod. They go straight to Jerusalem, straight to the castle, straight towards the king of that area to address him. But most likely, they were coming and they were in Jerusalem asking others, where is this King of the Jews? We have come to worship him. Where is the King of the Jews? We have come to worship him. Because it says in the next verse, when Herod the king had heard these things, so he's hearing about it. Doesn't sound like he's hearing it straight from them. When he's hearing these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So why would all Jerusalem be troubled if they went directly to him? If they did go directly to him, one likely thing is because they came into town with a small army, asking, where is the King of the Jews? Guess what Herod's title was, or at least one of the titles that he claimed? King of the Jews. And so someone's coming into town, these men with a small army coming into town saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? We have come to worship him. Now, a little bit about Herod. I've mentioned a few things, but Herod is a very interesting character. He was a man that came into power because of connections that his family had. He was Jewish by faith, but he didn't hold to the Jewish faith, if that makes any sense. Kind of like a Christian who doesn't hold to Christian beliefs, right? So his family was not Jewish by blood. His family, his ancestors were actually forced to take on the Jewish faith. And so they did, as were many others when they were conquered. So they took on the Jewish faith. This carried down to his generation. So he was Jewish in his beliefs, but he wasn't a good Jew. History records him in a couple of different ways. There's some history books that says he was loved by the Jews. He did a lot of good for the Jewish people. He did a lot of building projects. Up until that point in time, he had done more building projects than any other king or leader before him in that area. There are others, though, that says that he was a tyrant and he was hated by the Jews. While he was Jewish and he did respect their belief to a certain degree, he also tried to be the king for the pagans in the area, and he tried to connect with them as well. So he was a mixture. He was like a Jew that wasn't a dedicated Jew, but tried to portray himself as though he was. More than likely, history, both those things were probably true of him. We do know that he was a bit of a tyrant. There's plenty of evidence of that. We do know that he was very paranoid about losing his authority. Listen, when he came into authority, You go back in history, and there was this little conflict going on who was going to be the next Caesar. And there was a little thing going on between two very powerful and popular people in that area. One was the famous Mark Antony. Probably read about him in history. Mark Antony wanted to be the one in power. The other one was Caesar Augustus, who wanted to be in the power. Well, Herod chose to back Mark Antony. He had a relationship with Mark Antony. So he chose to back him, but Mark Antony lost, which now meant he had to repair his relationship with Caesar Augustus. He had to prove to Caesar Augustus that he could be trusted, that he was dedicated to him now, that he would serve him, so that Caesar Augustus would not throw him out or kill him or something to that degree. So he was a politician for sure, right? Saying whatever he needs to say to whoever he needs to say it to smooth things over. And so Herod was so paranoid about losing his authority, he actually killed several family members. He killed at least 2 of his sons because he saw them as a threat to his throne. He killed 1 of his wives. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I'm not 100% on this, but I'm pretty sure he killed 1 of his daughters as well. It was not a man that took any kind of opposition against him. In fact, Caesar Augustus once said of him, it would be better to be a pig belonging to Herod than it would be to be one of his sons. Because being a Jew, he wouldn't kill a pig. And so that's how he was thought of. But he was ruthless. And so it says, when Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So once he was troubled, all Jerusalem definitely would be troubled as well. But I believe all Jerusalem is troubled because they have seen these people come into town. They don't know what's going on. They're saying, we're looking for he who is been born a king of the Jews. The only ones who we know of that recognize Jesus as the king of the Jews, someone to be worshipped, were the shepherds. We don't have any record of anyone else going to worship him. And so people are troubled. They're expecting trouble to come. And so immediately he says, and King Herod says, and when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ would be born. And they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. And that's in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, is where they get that prophecy from. Then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. So he's wanting to know all the information. When did you see this star? When did this happen? This is more proof that the wise men would have left after the star was in the sky, because he's looking at it as, well, when did you see the star? Because that was obviously when the baby was born. And he wants to know when that was. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go search diligently for the young child, not babe, but the young child. And when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. So he's telling the wise men, he said, look, go on to Bethlehem. We know from prophecy he was born in Bethlehem. So you go on to Bethlehem to find him. And when you find them, come back and tell me, because I want to go and worship him as well. Now, is that really what Herod wanted to do? No. He wanted to go and kill the opposition. Now, for a man who most likely would have been dead anyway by the time this baby became a king, that's how obsessed he was with not losing his power with anyone that would come against him. He's willing to kill a young child in order to get rid of anyone who might stand in opposition to him. And when they had heard the king, they departed. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. So listen, we have this idea that they saw the star and that they traveled and the star guided them the entire way and they followed that star all the way. Then I used to wonder, well, if they followed the star the entire way, why did they stop off in Jerusalem to ask, where is he? Most likely what happens, the star appeared. They recognized it from prophecy. It was a special star. It wasn't just a regular star. It was just something. There's all this argument today on what kind of star it was. whether it was Jupiter and other planets aligning to form this that looked like a star, all these different things. I'll say the Bible says it was a star. I'll just believe it was a special star that God created. It was brighter than most stars. It was probably bigger than most stars. It was easier to spot. They knew it was special from prophecy. And one thing that gets me too is when they studied the prophecy, they didn't say, I wonder if this could be it. I wonder if this is it. But how can we know? We don't really know. How can we know? There was none of that. They knew when they saw the star. When we studied the scriptures, when we study prophecy, when it actually comes to pass, we can know that it's coming to pass. We don't have to guess and wonder. Follow what Scripture says, and it will lead us to so much more than what we'll find on our own. And so they were exceedingly great, with exceeding joy, because they saw the star again. It obviously had disappeared. They had not seen it for a while. They knew they were heading to Israel. Where else would you go to Israel but to Jerusalem if you're looking for a king, right? So they knew where they were going. They didn't need a star to guide them the whole way. They saw the star. That was a sign of the prophecy. They traveled. At some point, whether it's right after they left, right before they left, during their journey, whatever it was, the star disappeared and they had not seen it until now. And they rejoice because there it is. And when they were come into the house, not the stable, when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. So they were living in a house when this happened. And this was a young child, not a babe. A young child could have been the age 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Could be a young child. Most likely Jesus was somewhere around 2 years old or younger. And the Bible even kind of confirms that, doesn't it? In a few minutes, we'll see that. So he would have been 2 years old or younger based on the information the wise men gave to Herod. And so these gifts that they gave, we hear a lot of people talking about the spiritual meaning of these gifts. Now, there may be some truth to it. The Bible doesn't really confirm that too much. The one thing we know for a fact about these gifts is that they were expensive. You got gold, you got frankincense, you got myrrh. Now, there could be some spiritual meaning to them. Some of the most, there's a plenty of them out there, different topics that people say, different tie-ins that they do. But the most popular that I've heard is the gold represents what? What have you heard? Gold represents Jesus as a king. They recognize him as a king. Is why they gave him gold. Frankincense, some would say it's because they were recognizing him as the high priest. Others say they recognize him as God himself, which makes more sense with the fact that they were coming to worship him. And myrrh was to recognize the fact that he would die for people's sins. Now, I don't believe the wise men, as wise as they were, completely understood that the Messiah would in fact die and come back to life for their sins. The apostles didn't even understand that, did they? Now, obviously, these were more learned men. They were men that studied all of this. They spent a lot of time studying. The apostles were not. They were fishermen. And so they probably learned some of the scriptures growing up from their family, but they did not go to school for that the way that these men would have. But whether there's any spiritual meaning or not, the fact is they were given gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. So most likely they believed Herod because he was a cunning, manipulating man. And most likely they would have went back and told him.